For 3 endless weeks, the Alpha King's legendary wolves refused food. They turned away fresh meat carried by trembling soldiers. They ignored bowls of clear mountain water. Even the strongest among them no longer lifted their heads when the evening horns echoed across the camp. One by one, the proud guardians of the Kingdom of Aranor settled beneath the towering pines as though listening to a sorrow hidden deep beneath the earth itself. No healer could explain it. No priest could lift it. No hunter dared speak of it after sunset. The wolves were not simply dying. They were waiting. Waiting for something no one else could see. Then, on the morning another great wolf struggled to draw what everyone believed would be its final breath, a poor Omega girl appeared on the narrow mountain road carrying nothing more than a faded satchel filled with wild herbs and a hope she had never learned to abandon. The wolves did not bare their teeth. They did not growl. Instead, they lowered their heads. And the Alpha King, feared by enemies and respected by every kingdom beyond the mountains, found himself staring in complete silence at the one woman his own people had spent years calling weak. Winter arrived early in Aranor. Snow covered the highest peaks long before the first harvest festival ended, and cold winds rolled through the valleys like wandering spirits searching for forgotten names. Every pine tree bowed beneath thick blankets of white, while rivers that once sang across the mountains now whispered beneath thin sheets of crystal ice. To strangers, Aranor looked peaceful. To those who lived there, it had never felt more afraid. 4 generations beyond memory, the strength of the kingdom had never rested inside its stone castles or its sharpened swords. It rested inside wolves. Not ordinary wolves, but the descendants of the first pack, creatures older than the kingdom itself. Their bloodlines were said to carry ancient magic born when the moon first touched the mountains. Every Alpha King inherited more than a crown. He inherited their trust. As long as the wolves remained healthy, the kingdom prospered. Fields flourished. Children laughed without fear. Travelers crossed forests safely beneath watchful golden eyes. But when wolves suffered, the land suffered beside them. No one alive remembered a single season when the royal packs had fallen ill. Until now. The sickness had arrived quietly. One wolf refused breakfast. Another stopped hunting. Then another. Within days, the strongest hunters staggered across the camp with slow, uncertain steps. Their thick silver coats lost their shine. Their bright eyes grew distant. Some stared endlessly toward the northern mountains as though hearing voices carried only by the wind. Others simply lay beneath ancient pine trees and refused to move. The kingdom's greatest healers rushed toward the royal camp. They carried polished silver instruments, rare medicines, ancient scrolls, sacred oils blessed inside moon temples. Nothing changed. The wolves ignored every treatment. Several bit the hands of healers who tried forcing medicine into their mouths. Soon whispers spread faster than snowstorms. Some believed enemies had cursed the kingdom. Others claimed forgotten gods demanded punishment. The oldest villagers lowered their voices whenever children came near. The mountains are remembering something. No one understood what that meant. Even fewer dared ask. Far from the capital, beyond forests where roads became little more than narrow animal trails, rested a forgotten village named Briar Hollow. It barely appeared on royal maps. Its cottages leaned beneath worn wooden roofs patched countless times through endless winters. Smoke curled lazily from crooked chimneys. Goats wandered between gardens fenced with rough branches. Life there was simple, hard, quiet. Among those forgotten people lived a young Omega named Lyra. She owned almost nothing. A tiny cottage stood at the edge of the woods where moss climbed over old stones and climbing roses somehow survived each spring despite the harsh mountain weather. Its roof leaked whenever heavy rain arrived. Its fireplace smoked whenever the wind shifted. Still, flowers always bloomed beneath its windows. Not because the soil was rich. Because Lyra cared for every living thing that crossed her path. Each morning before sunrise she wrapped herself inside a patched grey cloak and disappeared into the forest carrying a woven basket nearly as old as the cottage itself. She knew every trail, every stream, every hidden meadow where healing herbs quietly pushed through fallen leaves. She gathered wild mint after rain because its scent grew strongest then. She collected silver root before dawn while dew still rested on its leaves. She waited patiently beside rocky cliffs each spring for moon blossoms that opened only during the first light of morning. The forest had become her teacher long before people ever offered kindness. Birds no longer flew away when she approached. Foxes watched from nearby bushes without fear. Even frightened rabbits often remained perfectly still while she passed. The old villagers sometimes joked that the woods knew her name better than the people did. Unfortunately, the people rarely spoke it kindly. Omega. The word followed her everywhere. Sometimes whispered. Sometimes laughed. Sometimes spoken loudly enough that she could never pretend not to hear. Parents pulled children closer whenever she walked through the market. Merchants offered poorer goods than they sold everyone else. Travelers rarely accepted water from her hands. None of them hated her personally. They simply believed what they had been taught. That omegas brought weakness, bad fortune, failure. Lyra stopped trying to change their minds years ago. Kindness had become her answer. One icy afternoon she discovered a young deer tangled inside broken hunting ropes deep within the forest. Its frightened breathing echoed through the silent trees. The rope had cut deeply into one slender leg. Blood stained the fresh snow beneath it. Most hunters would have ended the animal's suffering quickly. Lyra slowly knelt instead. "It's all right," she whispered softly. Her voice barely rose above the rustling branches. "I'm not here to hurt you." The deer struggled, then froze. Something inside the girl's calm eyes seemed to quiet the panic filling the small creature. Patiently, she loosened every knot, wrapped the wound with clean cloth torn from her own sleeve, gathered nearby herbs, crushed them between smooth stones, pressed the cool mixture gently against the bleeding skin. When she finished, she stepped backward instead of reaching again. The deer stood carefully. Its injured leg trembled beneath its weight. For one long moment it simply looked at her, then disappeared into the forest. Lyra smiled. No one had witnessed what happened. No one would thank her. That had never mattered. By the time she returned to Briar Hollow, evening bells drifted faintly across the valley. She entered the tiny village square carrying her basket overflowing with herbs. Conversations stopped. An elderly merchant glanced toward her before quietly shaking his head. "Too late today." "I wasn't buying," Lyra answered gently. He looked almost embarrassed. Without another word she continued home. Inside her cottage, warmth slowly spread from the crackling fire. Bundles of drying herbs hung from wooden beams overhead. Clay jars filled neatly carved shelves. The room smelled of cedar wood, lavender, and fresh pine needles. It wasn't much, but every corner carried traces of careful hands. After preparing a simple bowl of vegetable stew, Lyra sat beside the window watching snow drift across the darkening forest. That was when she heard it. A howl. Long. Low. Heartbreaking. Another answered. Then another. The sound floated across the mountains like grief itself. She slowly lowered her spoon. Those weren't ordinary wolves. There was pain inside those voices. The kind of pain no hunter's trap could create. The village door suddenly burst open nearby as frightened voices filled the square. Travelers had arrived from the capital. Their horses breathed clouds into the freezing air while thick snow clung to worn cloaks. Everyone gathered quickly. "They're dying," one traveler said. "The Alpha King's wolves. No healer can save them. The king has offered silver to anyone who finds a cure." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The merchant crossed himself. "The end has come." An old woman muttered a quiet prayer beneath her breath. Others spoke of curses, war, ancient spirits. Lyra remained silent. That lonely howl still echoed inside her heart. She remembered the frightened deer, the warmth beneath its trembling skin, the relief in its eyes before disappearing among the trees. Pain always sounded the same, whether carried by birds, people, or wolves. That night sleep refused to come. Wind rattled the cottage windows while moonlight stretched pale across the wooden floor. Again the distant howls drifted across the frozen valleys. Fainter this time. Weaker. Almost pleading. Before dawn, Lyra quietly rose from bed. She packed fresh herbs, bandages, dried roots, Honey wrapped carefully inside cloth. A small iron kettle. Everything she believed might help. No one had asked her to go. No messenger would welcome her. She fully expected soldiers to turn her away. Still, if even one creature somewhere in those mountains suffered while she stayed safely home, she knew she would never forgive herself. As the first golden light touched the snowy peaks, Lyra locked the cottage door behind her. The forest greeted her with perfect silence. Fresh snow crunched beneath worn leather boots. Cold air filled her lungs until every breath stung. Hours passed. The climb grew steeper. Towering pines crowded closer together. Animal tracks crossed the narrow trail. Occasionally ravens circled high above the cliffs, their cries disappearing into endless white skies. By afternoon, smoke appeared beyond the trees. Not from cottages. From hundreds of campfires. The Royal Military Camp. Tall wooden watchtowers rose above sharpened walls. Royal banners snapped violently in the mountain wind. Armored soldiers moved between rows of tents. Yet something felt terribly wrong. No laughter. No sparring. No music. Only silence. Heavy. Watching. Waiting. Lyra tightened her grip on the worn satchel hanging from her shoulder and stepped carefully out from the shelter of the trees. A guard spotted her almost immediately. His hand flew toward his sword. "Stop right there." Within seconds, half a dozen soldiers surrounded her. Steel flashed in the fading afternoon light. "State your business." Lyra swallowed slowly but did not step backward. "I came to help the wolves." Several soldiers exchanged doubtful looks before quiet laughter spread through the group. One shook his head. "A poor Omega." Another scoffed. "The greatest healers in the kingdom failed." "What makes you think you can do anything?" Before Lyra could answer, something moved beyond the line of tents. Then another. Then another. Dozens of massive wolves slowly emerged from the camp. The soldiers instinctively stepped aside. Every hand tightened around sword hilts. No one breathed. The largest wolf, its silver fur dulled by illness, walked directly toward the trembling girl. Its heavy paws left deep prints in the snow. Its golden eyes never left hers. The soldiers waited for blood. Instead, the great wolf lowered its enormous head until its cold nose gently touched Lyra's outstretched hand. Behind it, every other wolf followed. And all across the silent camp, the impossible began. For one endless heartbeat, the entire camp forgot how to breathe. The wind continued to sweep across the mountain pass, carrying tiny crystals of snow through the rows of tents, but no one moved. Hardened soldiers who had faced enemy armies without fear stood frozen where they were, their hands still resting on sword hilts that suddenly felt useless against what unfolded before their eyes. The great silver wolf remained before Lyra. Its breath drifted in slow white clouds into the icy air. Instead of snapping at the stranger, it gently leaned the weight of its scarred head against her trembling palm. Its fur felt colder than fresh snow. Beneath that thick coat, its body shook with quiet weakness. Another wolf approached. Then another. Within moments, the entire royal pack surrounded the young Omega in complete silence. Some lowered themselves onto the frozen ground. Others rested their tired heads near her boots. One old grey wolf slowly closed its eyes as though finding peace for the first time in weeks. No command had summoned them. No whistle had called them. They had come willingly. A murmur swept through the gathered soldiers. "I've never seen anything like this." They attacked the high priest yesterday. One nearly tore a royal physician apart. "Why her?" No one had an answer. Across the clearing, a tall figure stepped from between two command tents. The conversations died immediately. Even the wind seemed quieter. Alpha King Rowan walked toward them with long, measured strides. His dark winter cloak moved behind him like a shadow across the snow, its heavy fur collar dusted with tiny flakes. A silver wolf crest rested upon his chest, polished so brightly it caught the fading afternoon light. Years of leading warriors had carved calm into every movement he made. His face showed little emotion, but his sharp grey eyes missed nothing. They lingered first on the wolves, then on the young woman standing quietly among them. The largest wolf had not allowed Rowan himself to touch him since the sickness began. Now the old guardian leaned peacefully against an unknown omega. Rowan stopped several steps away. No one spoke. His gaze settled on Lyra. "You came alone." His voice was deep, steady, almost softened by curiosity. Lyra nodded. "I heard they were suffering." Nothing more. No dramatic speech. No plea for recognition. Simply the truth. One captain stepped forward. "Your Majesty, she claims she came to help." The captain hesitated before adding quietly, "Though, it seems the wolves already know her." Rowan looked back toward the pack. The great silver wolf slowly lifted its tired eyes toward the Alpha King. Not in warning. Not in fear. Almost. In request. Rowan had spent his entire life beside wolves. He understood their smallest movements. The old guardian was asking him to trust her. It should have been impossible. Yet there it was. The king slowly nodded. "Lower your weapons." Several soldiers hesitated. "My king." I said lower them. Steel disappeared back into scabbards. The mountain camp seemed to exhale all at once. Rowan turned toward Lyra again. "If they trust you." His voice grew quieter. "Then I will hear what you have to say." Lyra followed Rowan through the camp. Everywhere she looked, signs of quiet heartbreak surrounded her. Large wooden shelters had been built to protect the wolves from snowstorms. Fresh straw covered the ground. Blankets lined sleeping areas. Bowls of untouched meat rested beside nearly every resting place. Some wolves slept so deeply they barely noticed anyone passing. Others stared toward distant mountains with empty, exhausted eyes. The silence hurt more than any howl. Soldiers moved carefully among them. These were not simply military animals. Many had been raised from tiny cubs beside the men now watching them fade. One young soldier quietly brushed frost from a black wolf's ears. Another whispered softly while changing fresh water that no one expected would be touched. Lyra noticed every small act. Love had not been absent here. Only answers. Rowan stopped beside a broad wooden shelter. "This is Fenrir." The enormous silver wolf slowly lifted his head. Age had covered his muzzle with pale white fur. Countless scars crossed his shoulders, reminders of battles fought defending both king and kingdom. "He has stood beside 3 generations of my family." Rowan's hand rested gently against the old wolf's neck. "He refuses food. He refuses medicine. He no longer leaves this place." Lyra knelt slowly. She did not rush toward him. She waited. Fenrir watched her. His breathing remained slow. Painful. Patiently, she extended one empty hand. The old wolf leaned forward. His nose touched her fingers. Only then did she move closer. Her hands disappeared beneath his heavy fur. Instead of searching quickly, she closed her eyes. She listened. To his breathing. To the rhythm of his heartbeat. To the tiny tremors moving beneath tired muscles. The camp remained silent behind her. Minutes passed. Finally she opened her eyes. "He isn't afraid of dying." The soldiers exchanged confused glances. Rowan frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Lyra gently stroked the wolf's neck. "He's afraid of leaving something unfinished." No one answered. The words sounded strange. Yet somehow, they fit. Fenrir quietly rested his head across her lap. A low sigh escaped him. The first peaceful sound anyone had heard from the old wolf in many days. As evening settled across the mountains, Rowan invited Lyra into the command tent. Warm firelight flickered across wooden maps spread over a massive table. Outside, snow tapped softly against stretched canvas while distant wolves shifted quietly in their shelters. Servants placed warm stew, fresh bread, and herbal tea before them. Lyra hesitated. She was not accustomed to sitting at the same table as kings. Rowan noticed. "You've walked all day. You should eat." She quietly thanked him. For several moments neither spoke. Finally Rowan broke the silence. "Where did you learn healing?" Lyra wrapped cold fingers around the warm cup. "My grandmother. She lived in Briar Hollow. People said she knew the old ways." "The old ways," Rowan repeated. Lyra nodded. The forest teaches those willing to listen. Several advisors exchanged doubtful looks. One elderly physician folded his arms. Plants cannot cure what dozens of trained healers could not. Lyra did not argue. She simply smiled politely. They might. If the sickness isn't what everyone believes. The physician frowned. What are you suggesting? I don't know yet. She looked toward the tent entrance. But I will. Long after darkness covered the camp, Lyra returned to the wolves. Moonlight spilled between tall pines, turning untouched snow into silver glass. Most soldiers had retired. Only a handful remained awake beside scattered campfires. The wolves stirred as she approached. Not wildly. Not eagerly. Simply. Comfortably. Like children recognizing a familiar voice. Lyra carried a small lantern in one hand. With the other she gently examined each wolf. She checked their eyes. Their paws. Their breathing. Their ears. Their teeth. She looked beyond the obvious. The first healer to do so. Near midnight she reached a young black wolf lying beneath a cedar tree. Its thick fur appeared healthy. Its heartbeat remained strong. Yet something caught her attention. She gently parted the fur near its shoulder. A tiny black mark rested against the skin. Barely larger than a grain of wheat. It looked almost like burned ash beneath the surface. She leaned closer. Another mark. Near the ribs. Then another beneath one foreleg. Her heartbeat quickened. She carefully examined Fenrir. The same marks. Hidden beneath silver fur. Almost invisible. One after another she checked every wolf. Every single one carried them. The marks were too similar. Too precise. Illness did not leave matching signs. Something else did. Lyra slowly stood. Cold wind brushed loose strands of chestnut hair across her face. She turned toward the dark forest beyond the camp. Somewhere. The answer waited there. Before sunrise she left the camp alone. No guards followed. No soldiers questioned her. Only Fenrir watched quietly as she disappeared among towering pines. The forest welcomed her with familiar silence. Snow muffled every footstep. Sunlight slowly filtered through branches heavy with frost. She moved carefully from one hidden meadow to another, collecting herbs few people still recognized. Silverleaf grew beneath fallen cedar branches where sunlight barely reached. Winter sage clung stubbornly to rocky cliffs warmed by underground springs. She harvested bitter frostroot from the edge of a frozen stream, carefully digging around each plant so its roots remained whole. Hours passed. Birdsong gradually returned as morning brightened. A tiny robin landed upon a nearby branch, tilting its head while watching her work. Lyra smiled. You remember this place too. The bird fluttered ahead. Again. Then again. Almost guiding her deeper into the woods. Curious, she followed. The robin finally stopped beside an ancient stone circle almost hidden beneath moss and snow. Most of its carved pillars had collapsed centuries earlier. Vines twisted across weathered symbols nearly erased by time. At the center stood a single cracked basin filled with frozen rainwater. Lyra slowly brushed snow away from one worn carving. Her fingers stopped. The image showed. A woman kneeling beside wolves. Not commanding them. Healing them. Around both figures stretched branches, rivers, stars, and moonlight woven together into one endless circle. Her grandmother had once described similar carvings during winter evenings beside the fire. The first omegas, she had whispered, didn't serve wolves. They walked beside them. Lyra's chest tightened. Could this place truly be one of those forgotten sanctuaries? A soft growl broke the silence. She turned. A massive white owl watched from the broken arch above. Its golden eyes reflected the pale winter sky. It did not appear frightened. Instead, it looked toward the frozen basin, then spread its wings and disappeared between the trees. Lyra knelt beside the basin. Beneath the thin layer of ice rested dark stains unlike anything nature should have created. Black, thick, almost alive beneath the frozen water. She touched the edge carefully. The ice cracked. A faint smell drifted upward. Not decay. Not poison. Something older. Something buried. Her heart began to pound. The sickness had never started inside the wolves. It had begun in the land itself. Clutching the herbs tightly against her chest, Lyra hurried back toward the royal camp, unaware that hidden high among the snow-covered cliffs, another pair of eyes had been watching her every step. Lord Cedric slowly lowered his spyglass. A cold smile spread across his face. The poor Omega had begun asking exactly the questions he had hoped no one would ever ask. The first rays of morning had barely reached the mountain peaks when Lyra crossed the wooden gates of the royal camp once again. Frost clung to the edges of her cloak, and tiny crystals of snow glittered in her hair. Her boots were soaked from crossing frozen streams, yet she walked with quiet purpose, holding the basket of herbs close against her chest as though carrying something far more precious than plants. The guards recognized her immediately. No one stopped her this time. Instead, they stepped aside without speaking. Respect had begun to replace suspicion. Not because they fully trusted the young Omega, but because the wolves did. That alone was enough. As Lyra entered the heart of the camp, several wolves slowly lifted their heads. Fenrir was the first. The old guardian struggled to his feet, every movement stiff with exhaustion, yet his tired tail brushed gently against the snow. Another wolf followed. Then another. A quiet ripple spread through the pack. The soldiers noticed. So they really were waiting for her. One young guard whispered the words almost to himself. Lyra knelt beside Fenrir, smiling softly. "You've been patient." The great wolf answered with a low rumble that vibrated through his broad chest. Not a warning. Not pain. Recognition. She carefully unpacked the herbs she had gathered before sunrise. Fresh silver leaf. Winter sage. Frostroot. A handful of tiny blue blossoms still covered with morning dew. The camp physician watched from nearby, arms folded tightly across his chest. His expression revealed little faith. "Those are common mountain herbs. They've been used for generations. They cannot cure this." Lyra looked up. "No, they cannot." The physician blinked. "Then why gather them?" "Because herbs heal wounds." She crushed several leaves together with a smooth stone. "They do not remove curses." Silence settled over the gathering. Even Rowan looked toward her with sharpened attention. "Curses." The word carried through the cold morning air. Lyra did not answer immediately. Instead, she mixed the crushed herbs into warm spring water until the liquid became deep green. The scent spread gently through the camp. Fresh pine. Wild mint. Earth after rain. One by one she dipped strips of clean linen into the mixture. Instead of placing the remedy into the wolves' mouths, she gently washed the small black marks hidden beneath their fur. The soldiers exchanged puzzled looks. Nothing happened. Then, the marks began to change. Tiny streams of black mist escaped the wolf's skin like smoke leaving dying embers. The old physician stumbled forward. "Impossible." Fenrir inhaled sharply. His body tensed. For a frightening moment everyone thought he might collapse. Instead, the old wolf slowly released a long, steady breath. The strain disappeared from his eyes. His ears lifted. For the first time in weeks, he stood without trembling. The entire camp fell silent. A young wolf nearby rose to its feet. Then another. Within minutes, several wolves began drinking water on their own. One cautiously accepted a piece of fresh venison from a kneeling soldier. The young man stared in disbelief before tears quietly filled his eyes. He ate. His voice cracked. He finally ate. Around him, weary soldiers smiled for the first time in many days. Some laughed softly. Others simply bowed their heads in relief. Hope returned to the camp like the first warmth of spring after a long winter. Yet Lyra did not celebrate. Her eyes remained fixed on the fading black mist drifting into the cold air. Whatever poisoned the wolves, it had not been destroyed, only disturbed. That evening Rowan invited Lyra to walk beyond the camp. Snow crunched quietly beneath their boots as they followed a narrow trail overlooking the valley below. The setting sun painted the mountains in deep shades of gold and crimson. For a while neither spoke. The peaceful silence felt strangely comfortable. Finally Rowan looked toward the distant forests. My father told me the wolves were gifts. He never explained why. Lyra smiled faintly. Perhaps he didn't know. Rowan glanced toward her. You truly believe this sickness is connected to something ancient? I do. What makes you certain? She bent to pick up a small pine cone resting in the snow. When trees become sick. She brushed fresh snow from its rough scales. Their leaves show it. When rivers become poisoned. She tossed the pine cone gently into a frozen stream. The fish disappear. She looked toward the endless forest stretching beyond the mountains. But when wolves become sick together. Her voice softened. I begin searching beneath the ground. Rowan considered her words carefully. You see connections others ignore. Lyra gave a small shrug. My grandmother taught me to listen before searching for answers. The king smiled. A lesson I wish more advisors had learned. For the first time since they met, both of them laughed quietly. The sound disappeared into the evening wind. High above them, unseen among the cliffs, someone watched. Lord Cedric lowered himself behind a weathered boulder. His expression hardened. Every hour Lyra remained alive made her more dangerous. She had already healed enough wolves to give the soldiers hope. Soon, she would begin asking questions no one must ever answer. Days passed. One by one the wolves regained their strength. The camp slowly awakened from its long silence. Morning training resumed. Cookfires burned brighter. The familiar sounds of sharpening swords and repairing armor returned. Most beautiful of all, the wolves began running again. Not with full strength. Not yet. But every sunrise brought another small miracle. Young pups chased one another between tents. Grey hunters disappeared into the woods before dawn and returned carrying fresh game. Fenrir himself walked beside Rowan during the evening patrol for the first time since winter began. The soldiers cheered quietly as the old wolf passed. No one doubted who deserved the credit. Yet Lyra remained troubled. Every healed wolf still carried faint traces of the black marks beneath its fur. Hidden. Sleeping. Waiting. The source remained untouched. One rainy afternoon, while replacing fresh bandages on a young she-wolf's injured shoulder, Lyra noticed something unusual. The wolf suddenly lifted her nose toward the northern forest. Every muscle in her body became rigid. A low growl escaped her throat. Within seconds, every wolf in the camp reacted the same way. Heads turned together. Ears stood alert. Silence spread like a shadow. Fenrir slowly rose. His golden eyes fixed upon the distant tree line. Without warning, he began walking. Not toward Rowan. Not toward the hunting grounds. Toward the ancient forest. Another wolf followed. Then another. The entire pack seemed ready to leave. Rowan stepped forward. Fenrir. The old guardian paused. But he did not return. Instead he looked back only once. Straight at Lyra. There was urgency inside those tired golden eyes. Almost. A plea. Lyra understood before anyone spoke. They've sensed something. The soldiers quickly reached for weapons. Rowan gave a sharp nod. Prepare the scouts. Before anyone could move, Fenrir let out a single deep howl that echoed across the mountains. It was not a cry of pain. It was a call. From somewhere deep within the distant forest. Another howl answered. Weak. Broken. Then silence. Fenrir ran. Age seemed to vanish from his body as he disappeared between towering pines. Several younger wolves raced after him. Follow them. Rowan ordered. The soldiers hurried into motion. Boots pounded across frozen earth. Horses were prepared. Torches lit despite the fading daylight. But Lyra had already begun running. Her cloak caught the wind behind her as she disappeared beneath the dark branches. Rain replaced snow as she entered the forest. Cold drops dripped steadily from towering pines. The deeper she traveled, the stranger the woods became. Birdsong faded. Even the wind seemed unwilling to enter. Fenrir's tracks remained clear in the muddy ground. Huge paw prints. Fresh. Fast. Broken branches pointed the way forward. Minutes later, The trail changed. Dark stains marked the forest floor. Blood. Fresh enough that rain had not yet washed it away. Lyra slowed. Her breathing became shallow. Ahead, Fenrir stood perfectly still beside a narrow path hidden beneath tangled roots. At his feet lay another wolf. Young. Snow-white. Its side rose and fell with weak, painful breaths. A deep wound crossed its shoulder. But the injury itself was not what made Lyra's heart tighten. Hidden beneath the torn fur, the black marks had spread across nearly half its body. Far darker than anything she had seen before. She knelt beside the wounded animal. The wolf opened one frightened golden eye. It did not resist her touch. Instead it struggled to lift its head. With the last of its strength, it nudged its nose toward the darkness beyond the trees. As though begging her to keep going, to find whatever waited deeper within the cursed forest. And somewhere ahead, carried by the cold evening wind, came the distant echo of crumbling stone, followed by a sound no one in Aranor had heard for generations. A great iron gate slowly opening beneath the mountain. The sound rolled through the forest like distant thunder. It was deep, ancient, heavy enough to shake loose snow from the highest branches. No one spoke. Rain dripped steadily from dark pine needles while the echo slowly disappeared into the mountains, leaving behind a silence so complete that even breathing seemed too loud. Fenrir remained beside the wounded white wolf. The old guardian's ears stood forward. His eyes never left the narrow path winding deeper into the forest. He knew exactly where that sound had come from. Rowan reached Lyra only moments later, followed by a small group of trusted soldiers. Mud stained their boots, and their horses had been left behind at the forest's edge where the ground had become too uneven to cross. Every face carried the same question. What had opened beneath the mountain? One soldier stepped cautiously toward the wounded wolf. Lyra gently raised her hand. Don't. The man froze. The wound isn't what frightens him. She carefully rested one hand against the young wolf's neck. His heartbeat fluttered beneath damp fur like a frightened bird trapped inside a cage. He's trying to warn us. Fenrir let out another low rumble. This time Rowan understood. He looked toward the twisting trail ahead. We follow. No one argued. The deeper they walked, the older the forest became. The pines grew wider than houses. Roots rose from the earth like sleeping giants. Thick moss covered ancient stones carved by hands long turned to dust. The rain faded into a light mist that drifted between the trees, softening the world until every shadow seemed alive. Not a single bird sang. Not one squirrel darted through the branches. The forest itself appeared to be holding its breath. Lyra noticed the change first. The ferns growing beside the trail had turned black around their edges. Wildflowers lay withered despite the season. A tiny stream crossed the path ahead, but instead of reflecting the grey sky above, the water shimmered with faint streaks of dark silver. She knelt beside it. Her fingers hovered just above the surface. Cold. Far colder than mountain water should have been. She dipped a single leaf into the stream. Within seconds its bright green color faded into dull grey. The soldiers stared. What kind of poison does that? One whispered. Lyra slowly stood. This isn't poison. Her voice remained quiet. It's grief. The men exchanged uncertain glances. Rowan looked toward her. You've said strange things before. A faint smile touched her lips. And each time they proved true. He could not argue. They continued climbing. The path eventually ended beneath towering cliffs where vines hid the remains of an enormous stone staircase. Each step had been carved directly into the mountain. Rainwater flowed gently down the worn edges. Pieces of broken statues rested beneath centuries of moss. One figure still remained almost untouched. A woman. She knelt beside 3 wolves. Not above them. Not below them. Beside them. Her hands rested gently against their shoulders while all 4 figures faced the same rising moon carved into the stone behind them. Lyra stopped. Her fingers slowly brushed away years of moss. This. She whispered. My grandmother described this. The oldest soldier frowned. I've marched these mountains for 30 years. I've never seen these ruins. You weren't meant to. Everyone turned. The voice belonged to an elderly man wrapped in faded brown robes. His long white beard reached nearly to his waist, and rain glistened upon the crooked wooden staff supporting his tired body. No one had heard him approach. Even Fenrir had remained calm. The old man bowed his head toward Rowan. "My king." Rowan immediately recognized him. Elder Thane. The soldiers looked surprised. The old keeper of forgotten histories had lived alone near the eastern monastery for decades. Many believed he had died years ago. "You knew this place existed?" Rowan asked. Thane nodded slowly. "I prayed no one would ever need to find it again." His eyes rested upon Lyra. But the wolves remembered. He stepped toward the ancient statue. For centuries, the first Omegas were not servants. They were keepers. Healers. Guardians of the balance between mankind and the wild. His weathered hand touched the carved wolf beside the stone woman. The Alpha Kings protected the people. The Omegas protected the land. And the wolves bound them together. The rain seemed softer now. Almost respectful. "What happened?" Rowan asked quietly. The old man's shoulders lowered beneath the weight of forgotten history. "Fear. Power. Pride. Kings changed. Councils changed. People began believing strength came only from swords. The old ways were buried. The sanctuaries abandoned. The keepers disappeared." His eyes settled gently upon Lyra. Until one returned. A chill ran through the gathered soldiers. Not from the cold. From the realization that everything they had believed for generations had been incomplete. Lyra looked once more at the ancient carving. The woman upon the stone looked strangely familiar. Not in face. In posture. The same quiet patience. The same gentle hands reaching toward wounded wolves. Almost as though the mountain itself had been waiting for her. Fenrir climbed the staircase without hesitation. One by one the others followed. At the top stood an enormous circular doorway carved directly into the cliff. Its iron gates hung partially open. Fresh scratches marked the stone beside them. Someone had entered recently. Rowan drew his sword. The sound of steel echoed softly through the mist. "Stay close." The sanctuary beyond felt untouched by time. Tall stone columns disappeared into darkness overhead. Moonlight slipped through cracks in the ceiling, painting silver circles across the floor. Ancient murals covered every wall. Some showed wolves running beside kings. Others showed Omegas placing glowing hands upon rivers, forests, and wounded animals. The deeper they walked, the more beautiful the sanctuary became. Despite centuries of silence, nothing felt abandoned. It felt asleep. At the center of the great chamber rested a crystal pool fed by water dripping through the mountain above. The surface should have been perfectly clear. Instead, black smoke slowly curled beneath the water like ink spreading through glass. Lyra stepped closer. Her reflection shimmered across the dark surface. Then vanished. In its place appeared another image. A flourishing forest. Healthy wolves. Children laughing beside rivers. The vision shifted. Darkness spread across the land. Trees withered. Animals fled. A group of armored men carried heavy sacks glowing with strange black crystals. They buried them beneath sacred springs. The water turned dark. The wolves collapsed. The vision disappeared. The pool became still once more. Lyra staggered backward. She had seen enough. This wasn't an accident. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Someone poisoned the sacred springs. Rowan stared into the water. "Who?" No one answered. But somewhere behind them, someone smiled. Hidden between towering columns, Lord Cedric watched through the shadows. His mercenaries waited silently beside him, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods. He had followed them all morning. Every step, every discovery, everything the sanctuary had revealed threatened to destroy years of carefully hidden lies. He could not allow anyone to leave alive. Cedric slowly raised one hand. The mercenaries reached for small clay jars hanging from their belts. Each jar contained thick black oil mixed with powdered emberstone. One spark would be enough. The sanctuary had survived hundreds of years. It would not survive fire. Above the chamber, wind rushed through narrow cracks in the mountain. Torches flickered. One mercenary struck flint. A tiny flame danced to life. He tossed the burning torch. The oil exploded instantly. Fire raced across the ancient floor faster than water flowing downhill. Flames climbed the carved pillars. Dry roots hidden within the old stone caught fire almost immediately. The sanctuary roared to life. Smoke poured toward the ceiling. The soldiers spun around in shock. "Cedric!" Rowan shouted as the war advisor stepped calmly from the shadows. For the first time, the mask of loyalty had vanished from his face. Only cold satisfaction remained. "You should have stayed in the camp, Your Majesty." His voice echoed through the burning chamber. Some truths are kinder when they remain buried. Another explosion shattered a nearby column. Huge stones crashed onto the staircase. The only entrance collapsed beneath tons of rock. Dust and fire filled the air. The sanctuary had become a prison. Fenrir barked sharply. The wolves gathered around Lyra and Rowan as burning beams crashed around them. Smoke thickened with every passing second. The ancient sanctuary groaned beneath the weight of its collapsing roof. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Inside, the race between truth and destruction had begun. The sanctuary groaned as though the mountain itself had awakened in pain. Stone cracked overhead. Burning beams crashed against the ancient floor, sending showers of sparks through the smoke-filled chamber. The flames climbed the towering pillars with frightening speed, feeding on roots that had grown through the walls over countless centuries. Thick black smoke rolled across the ceiling before sinking lower with every passing breath. The air became almost impossible to breathe. Several soldiers wrapped their cloaks across their mouths. Others searched desperately through the falling debris for another exit. There was none. The staircase had vanished beneath a mountain of shattered stone. Rowan tightened his grip around his sword, though he knew steel could do nothing against a collapsing mountain. "Cedric!" His voice thundered through the smoke. The only answer was distant laughter. The traitor and his mercenaries had already escaped through a narrow passage hidden behind the sanctuary walls, sealing it behind them. They had not come to fight. They had come to erase history. Another violent crash shook the chamber. One of the great stone wolves carved beside the entrance toppled onto its side, breaking apart into dozens of pieces. For a brief moment, everyone simply stared. Centuries of forgotten history were disappearing before their eyes. Fenrir barked sharply. The old wolf limped toward the crystal pool in the center of the sanctuary. Although flames surrounded it, the water itself remained untouched. The black smoke beneath its surface continued to swirl slowly, almost peacefully, as if the fire above meant nothing to it. Lyra hurried after him. The heat pressed against her face until tears filled her eyes. She knelt beside the pool and looked into its dark depths once more. The swirling darkness no longer showed memories. Instead, it seemed to be waiting. Her fingertips hovered above the water. The moment they touched its surface, a freezing cold shot through her arm. The sanctuary disappeared. She stood inside another forest. Not the ruined one she knew. This forest was alive. Towering pines stretched proudly toward a bright blue sky. Crystal rivers danced over smooth stones. Wildflowers covered the earth in every direction. Dozens of wolves ran freely between the trees. Children laughed nearby while women in pale grey cloaks gathered herbs beside sparkling streams. One of them turned. She looked older than Lyra. Gentle eyes. Chestnut hair. The same quiet smile. Though they had never met, Lyra somehow knew. It was her grandmother. The woman walked toward the river, placing one hand upon the flowing water. "The land remembers every kindness." Her voice floated gently through the vision. And every wound. Darkness suddenly spread beneath the river. Not naturally. Men carrying sacks of black crystal buried them beneath sacred springs. The earth cried out. Trees withered. Animals fled. The wolves howled together beneath a blood-red moon. Her grandmother looked directly toward Lyra. "This curse cannot be washed away. It must be carried." The vision shattered. Lyra gasped as she returned to the burning sanctuary. Her hand still rested inside the crystal pool. Her entire arm trembled violently. Rowan caught her shoulders before she collapsed. What happened? She struggled to breathe. The curse. Her voice broke. It lives beneath the springs. It feeds on the land. It cannot simply disappear. The king searched her frightened eyes. Then tell me how we stop it. She looked toward the swirling darkness. There is only one way. Silence followed. Even the fire seemed quieter. The curse must leave the land. She swallowed painfully. And enter a living heart. Understanding slowly spread across Rowan's face. No. He already knew what she was about to say. No. Lyra looked at him with quiet sadness. My grandmother knew. That is why the keepers disappeared. They carried the darkness away. Rowan stepped between her and the pool. There must be another way. She wished there were. But the ancient sanctuary had already answered. The wolves had answered. The land itself had answered. There isn't. Another section of the ceiling collapsed. Massive stones crashed into the crystal pool, sending glowing water across the chamber floor. The black smoke rose higher. The curse was escaping. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Inside, the wolves grew restless. Not afraid. Protective. They slowly surrounded Lyra. Fenrir stood closest of all. The old guardian rested his scarred head gently against her shoulder. His golden eyes glistened in the firelight. He knew. Perhaps he had always known. Lyra smiled through tears. You've carried this long enough. She wrapped both hands around Fenrir's broad neck one last time. The old wolf closed his eyes. His deep rumble vibrated softly against her chest. Around them, every wolf lowered its head. Not in defeat. In honor. Rowan stepped forward. If a life must carry the curse. He removed the silver crest from his cloak. Then let it be mine. Lyra's eyes widened. No. I am the Alpha King. My duty is to protect this kingdom. And mine, she answered quietly, is to heal it. You cannot ask this of yourself. I'm not. She looked toward the crystal pool. The land already has. For the first time since becoming king, Rowan had no command strong enough to change what stood before him. His sword could defeat armies. His voice could move kingdoms. Neither could change destiny. Smoke thickened around them. Several soldiers had begun coughing violently. The sanctuary would not stand much longer. Lyra reached into her satchel. Inside rested the tiny wooden pendant her grandmother had carved many years before. A single wolf beneath a crescent moon. She closed her fingers around it. Then placed it gently into Rowan's hand. If I don't wake. His fingers tightened instantly. You will. She smiled sadly. I hope so. Before he could answer, she stepped into the crystal pool. The freezing water rose around her boots. Around her knees. Then her waist. The black smoke gathered before her like living shadows. She closed her eyes. The ancient words her grandmother had whispered beside countless winter fires slowly returned. Not learned from books. Remembered by the heart. She spoke them softly. The language felt older than kingdoms. Older than crowns. Older than war. The sanctuary responded. Every carved wolf upon the walls began glowing with pale silver light. The crystal water shimmered. Outside. The wind stopped. Across the mountains, every wolf in Aranor lifted its head toward the sky. A single howl rose into the night. Another answered. Then another. Soon hundreds echoed across forests, valleys, and frozen rivers. The sound carried through every village. Every mountain pass. Every hidden meadow. The kingdom itself seemed to be listening. Inside the sanctuary, the darkness rose from the water. It circled Lyra slowly. Then rushed toward her all at once. Pain exploded through her body. Her back arched. She cried out for the first time since entering the mountain. Black veins spread beneath her skin like frozen branches. The water around her turned completely dark. Rowan surged forward. No. Several soldiers grabbed him. He struggled fiercely. Let me go. You'll die. The men held him back with everything they had. Fenrir barked sharply. Not in anger. In warning. The ritual could not be broken. Lyra's breathing became shallow. Every heartbeat felt heavier than the last. Yet through unbearable pain, she kept speaking the ancient words. One by one, the black marks vanished from the wolves waiting beyond the water. Fenrir's scarred shoulders straightened. His cloudy eyes became bright once more. The younger wolves stood taller. Health returned like sunrise breaking through endless winter. Outside the sanctuary, something remarkable began to happen. The poisoned stream running beneath the mountain cleared. Dark water became crystal once again. Withered grass pushed through the snow. Tiny green shoots appeared along the riverbanks. Ancient trees that had stood lifeless for years slowly unfurled fresh emerald needles. Birdsong returned. Soft at first. Then stronger. Life spread outward from the mountain in every direction. The curse was leaving the land. It had found its new home. Inside Lyra. At last. The final strand of darkness disappeared beneath her skin. The crystal pool became perfectly clear. Silence filled the sanctuary. Lyra stood motionless. Her eyes slowly opened. For one beautiful moment, she smiled. Then her knees gave way. Rowan reached her before she disappeared beneath the water. He lifted her gently into his arms. Her skin felt cold. Far too cold. The black veins remained beneath her wrists. She did not open her eyes. Outside, the storm had ended. Moonlight poured through the broken roof, washing the sanctuary in soft silver light. Fenrir stepped forward. The old wolf touched his nose gently against Lyra's hand. A quiet whine escaped him. Then every wolf in the chamber bowed its head. Not because they had lost their healer, but because they honored the one who had carried their suffering as her own. Rowan looked toward the opening where Cedric had escaped. His grief slowly hardened into determination. The wolves were saved. The land was healing. But the man responsible still walked free. Cradling Lyra carefully against his chest, Rowan led the survivors out of the ruined sanctuary beneath a sky filled with stars. Far away, the lights of the capital shimmered beyond the mountains. And within those stone walls, Lord Cedric was already preparing one final lie. One that would turn the kingdom against the very woman who had just given everything to save it. The journey back to the capital took 3 long days. No victory songs echoed through the mountain passes. No banners waved proudly in celebration. The only sound that followed the royal procession was the steady rhythm of boots upon frozen roads and the quiet breathing of wolves that had finally regained their strength. At the front rode Alpha King Rowan. He did not sit proudly in his saddle. Instead, he carried Lyra in his arms beneath a thick fur cloak, shielding her from the biting wind as though the warmth of his own body could somehow pull her back from the darkness she had accepted into herself. She had not opened her eyes. Not once. Her breathing remained soft. Slow. Sometimes so faint that Rowan found himself stopping his horse simply to make certain she still lived. Each time he heard another gentle breath escape her lips, relief settled inside his chest only to vanish moments later beneath fresh worry. Fenrir never left her side. The old wolf walked beside Rowan's horse from sunrise until nightfall. Whenever the procession stopped to rest, he curled himself beside Lyra's blankets without making a sound. The other wolves did the same. They formed a silent circle around her every evening, facing outward toward the forest as though guarding not only a healer, but the heart of the kingdom itself. The soldiers noticed. No one spoke about it. Some things had grown too sacred for words. As the mountains disappeared behind them, the towers of Aranor slowly rose against the winter sky. The capital had always been a city of proud stone walls, towering gates, colorful markets, and lively streets where blacksmiths, merchants, musicians, and children filled every corner with life. Now, something felt different. The bells rang. But not in celebration. Crowds gathered before the gates, whispering among themselves. Faces carried confusion, fear, suspicion. By the time Rowan entered the city, rumors had already outrun him. Lord Cedric had made certain of it. He had returned a full day earlier. Standing before frightened nobles and influential merchants, he had woven lies with the confidence of a man who believed truth had burned inside the mountain sanctuary. The wolves were cursed the moment the Omega arrived. I warned the king. She deceived us. Now she carries the darkness herself. If she lives, the curse will spread into the kingdom. Fear did the rest. Fear always moved faster than reason. When Rowan reached the royal palace, the Grand Council had already gathered inside the Hall of Crowns. The vast chamber shimmered beneath hundreds of candles. Long banners hung between towering marble pillars. Nobles filled both sides of the hall, dressed in velvet robes trimmed with silver and fur. Few looked relieved to see the king. Most looked frightened. At the far end of the chamber stood Cedric. His polished armor reflected the candlelight. His expression was perfectly measured. Concerned. Loyal. Almost convincing. He stepped forward and bowed. My king. Rowan did not answer. He continued walking until he reached the center of the hall, where he gently laid Lyra upon a cushioned bench prepared near the throne. Her face remained pale. The black veins beneath her wrists had faded but not disappeared. The room fell silent. Cedric slowly lifted his voice. It grieves me to see her suffering. He lowered his head. But we cannot ignore what has happened. Several council members nodded. One elderly noble stepped forward. If she carries the curse. His hands trembled. Then she endangers every citizen. Another spoke. The laws are clear. Anyone touched by forbidden corruption must be executed before the darkness spreads. The words echoed through the chamber. Execute. The word struck Rowan harder than any sword. His hand instinctively rested upon the hilt at his side. You speak of killing the woman who saved this kingdom. Cedric sighed heavily. Or the woman who doomed it. The hall erupted into whispers. Some believed Rowan. Others feared Cedric. The balance hung upon a single thread. Outside the palace, something stirred. A young palace guard glanced toward the great courtyard. His eyes widened. Open. He whispered. Open the doors. Before anyone could question him, the enormous wooden gates slowly swung inward. A cold winter breeze swept through the hall. Snowflakes drifted across polished stone floors. Then, Fenrir entered. The old silver wolf walked slowly into the throne room with calm dignity. Every noble instinctively stepped backward. Not because they feared attack. Because they sensed something extraordinary. Behind Fenrir came another wolf. Then another. Within moments, the entire royal pack filled the vast hall. Not one growled. Not one showed aggression. They ignored the throne. Ignored the council. Ignored the frightened nobles. Every single wolf walked directly toward Lyra. Fenrir reached her first. He gently lowered his massive head beside her hand. A soft whine escaped his throat. One by one, every wolf followed. Some rested against the bench. Others lay quietly upon the floor. Several younger wolves carefully placed their heads upon each other's backs while watching over the sleeping healer. No command had called them. No trainer had guided them. They had chosen. The sight stole every voice from the chamber. Cedric's confident expression faltered for the first time. This proves nothing. But even he no longer sounded certain. The silence broke when another voice echoed through the hall. It proves everything. Elder Thane slowly entered the chamber carrying an old wooden chest wrapped in faded leather straps. Two soldiers followed behind him. The old historian walked with difficulty, yet his eyes burned with quiet determination. He stopped before the king. Then opened the chest. Inside rested dozens of ancient scrolls protected within polished cedar cases. Some bore the royal seal of kings forgotten by history. Others carried symbols no living noble recognized. Thane carefully lifted the oldest scroll. The records of the first keepers. Dust drifted softly into the candlelight. For centuries these remained hidden beneath the eastern monastery. No one asked for them. No one wished to remember. He slowly unrolled the fragile parchment. Beautiful illustrations filled its surface. Wolves. Omegas. Kings standing side by side. The first Alpha rulers had never ruled alone. The keepers had stood beside them, not beneath them. The old man continued reading. When darkness entered the sacred springs, the keepers carried it away. When greed poisoned the land, the wolves sought those whose hearts still remembered compassion. Murmurs spread through the hall. Faces changed. Confusion became realization. The pieces finally fit together. Rowan turned slowly toward Cedric. You knew. Cedric remained silent. You knew all of this. Still no answer. Thane reached into the chest once more. This time he removed a smaller bundle. Mine ledgers. Old military orders. Signed authorizations. Every page carried Cedric's personal seal. Documents proving shipments of enchanted black mineral had been buried beneath sacred springs years earlier. Not by enemies. By his own command. The chamber exploded with outrage. You poisoned the land. You sacrificed the wolves. You lied to the crown. Cedric looked from face to face. His perfect mask had shattered. There was no other way. His voice thundered through the hall. The neighboring kingdoms controlled the richest valleys. They would never surrender them peacefully. I needed stronger reasons for war. The wolves. His jaw tightened. Were acceptable losses. The words hung in the air. Acceptable losses. Not only wolves. Forests. Villages. Children. Everything had become numbers inside his ambition. Rowan slowly descended the steps of the throne. His grey eyes held no anger now. Only disappointment. You were willing to destroy the soul of this kingdom. To make yourself powerful. Cedric reached for the sword at his side. He never drew it. Fenrir stood. A single low growl filled the hall. Not loud. Not violent. Enough. The traitor's hand froze. The royal guards moved instantly. Within seconds Cedric stood surrounded. His sword clattered across the marble floor. Iron chains closed around his wrists. No one protested. Justice had already chosen its path. As Cedric disappeared beneath armed escort, an unexpected sound drifted through the throne room. A slow breath. Then another. Rowan turned. Lyra's fingers moved. Fenrir was the first to notice. His ears lifted sharply. The old wolf gently nudged her hand once more. Her eyelashes fluttered. The chamber became perfectly still. Very slowly. Lyra opened her eyes. Sunlight streamed through the high palace windows behind her, bathing the room in warm golden light. For a moment she looked confused. Then she saw the wolves surrounding her. She smiled. A small smile. Weak. But real. Fenrir let out a joyful rumble so deep it echoed through the hall. The younger wolves answered together. Not with fierce howls. With soft, welcoming voices that sounded almost like laughter. Even the soldiers smiled openly. Some wiped tears from their eyes. The kingdom had feared losing more than a healer. It had nearly lost its heart. Weeks passed. Winter slowly surrendered to spring. Snow melted from the mountain slopes. Crystal rivers rushed once more through green valleys. Wildflowers returned to the forests surrounding Aranor. Where poisoned streams had once carried darkness, children now skipped stones across clear water. Birdsong filled the mornings again. The wolves grew stronger with every passing day. Fenrir no longer limped. Young cubs raced through fields beneath blooming cherry trees. Travelers once again crossed the forests without fear, often pausing in wonder as wolves quietly watched from distant hills before disappearing among the pines. The kingdom itself seemed to breathe easier. Rowan kept his promise. The forgotten sanctuaries were restored. Ancient carvings were cleaned instead of hidden. The names of the first keepers were returned to the royal records. No child would grow up believing Omegas were weak again. They would learn the truth. That compassion had once saved a kingdom. And could do so again. Lyra never asked for titles. She never sought riches. She returned often to the forests, carrying the same woven basket she had owned long before anyone knew her name. She still rescued injured birds. Still gathered herbs before sunrise. still smiled at strangers whether they greeted her kindly or not. Only now, they greeted her with respect. Not because she had become powerful, because she had remained gentle when the world had given her every reason not to be. One quiet evening, Rowan found her standing beside the restored sanctuary high in the mountains. The setting sun painted the sky with shades of amber and rose. Fenrir rested nearby, watching a group of playful wolf cubs tumble through fresh grass. "The kingdom owes you everything," Rowan said softly. Lyra shook her head. The kingdom only needed to remember who it already was. For a while neither spoke. The mountain wind carried the scent of pine, wildflowers, and clean river water. Below them, wolves ran freely across the valleys. Children's laughter drifted upward from a nearby village. Life had returned. Not because darkness had never existed, but because kindness had refused to surrender to it. Rowan looked toward the endless forest stretching beyond the horizon. "Will they always choose you?" Lyra smiled as Fenrir slowly walked to her side and rested his great silver head against her shoulder, just as he had on the first day they met. "I don't think they chose me." She gently scratched behind the old wolf's ears. "I think they chose hope." Above them, the first stars appeared in the evening sky. A single wolf lifted its head toward the moon. Its howl rose clear and strong across the mountains. This time it carried no pain, no warning, only peace. And from every forest in Aranor, the rest of the pack answered together, their voices rolling across the kingdom like a promise that would never again be forgotten.